Welcome to Let's Talk Merrimack. I'm your host today, Mary Beth Raven. I've lived here in Merrimack with my husband for over 30 years. I raised my 2 kids here. The goal of this show is to talk about things that concern Merrimack residents and encourage you to get more involved in the town. Today's show focuses on the ongoing congressional campaign. And I'm joined here by Carleigh, one of the candidates for CD1 that Chris Pappas is vacating next term. So welcome, Carleigh. Nice to have you today. Thanks for joining. So let's jump right in. And I'd like to start by asking you, what personal stories from your own life and community do you think that voters in New Hampshire should hear that inform why you're running?
That's a great question. So after the election last fall, I have 2 kids, and they come with me every month to our local Hampton Democratic Committee meetings. And usually we sit in the back and color. And we've been doing that for a long time. And after the election last fall, things were getting pretty heated as people were processing the results, which weren't to their liking. And we came home from the meeting, and we have a stack of blue books in our kitchen. I'm a professor, and so I teach. And so we always have these blue books, right, where college students write their answers to their questions. And my daughter saw them, and she was in 1st grade, and she was like, "What are these blue books, Mom?" And I said, "They're for answering questions." And she said, "Give me a question." And I said, "Okay, Cyrilina, what are politics for? What are politics?" And so she went to the kitchen table and she wrote for, a couple minutes and came back with a few sentences. And she wrote, "Politics is for making your community a better place. It's going to Hampton Democrats meetings, sitting and talking and voting." And I'm really glad that that's the lesson that my kids have learned from the politics that we've been doing in our community, because to me, politics really is about what we can all do to make our community a better place. And that's one of the things that inspired me to run for select board in Hampton, and it's really motivating my campaign for Congress right now in New Hampshire.
All right, terrific. Well, speaking of children, you said you've got 2 kids, and one of the things you've proposed as part of your platform is capping child care costs at 7% of income. So how did you arrive at that figure, and how would you implement this at a federal scale?
Absolutely. So I know that there's a lot of families like mine out there who have been absolutely struggling with the cost of paying for child care. I know that, in the past few years, it's cost us as much as it would to send one of our kids to UNH, to send them to a regular daycare. Mm-hmm. And for so many families, it's just becoming this option where it's either send your kid to childcare or take off from work, right? Mm-hmm. Or lose your job because maybe you have a sick kid and you can't go to work. And it's just a struggle. So the 7% number, I'm not going to take credit for that. That's actually a number that our federal government came up with, and it's been consistent through the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, and our federal Department of Health and Human Services took a look at families' expenses. They said people with young kids pay for diapers, they pay for formula or for food, they pay for housing. They have a lot of expenses. So what amount of their income should go to childcare ideally? Right? Like we say, about 30% of a family's income should go towards housing. What would be an affordable amount for them to spend on childcare? And the number that our federal government came up with was 7%. And this doesn't mean that every family should pay 7% of their income towards childcare. It's this goal of what would be affordable. And so what we've seen, and already some states have implemented this, and we see it in some of our federal government's plans with the childcare that they provide towards members of our military, for example. But we say, okay, if you have not a lot of resources, right, maybe you pay 0% of your income towards childcare. But the maximum that any family should pay, regardless of how many children they have, is about 7% in order for it to be affordable. And that can be covered through things like an expanded child tax credit, right? It can be expended through block grants. We're seeing things like this in New Hampshire. And I actually wrote an op-ed in the Union Leader about this with Shannon Tremblay a few weeks back. But the goal is to make childcare affordable. And there are things that we can do at the policy level as a government to make that a reality for so many families. And that would also include things like flexible spending accounts. Mm-hmm. So like I know that there's a portion of our income, right, that we get to take out before taxes, and that money goes to helping us pay for childcare. So if we were to increase the cap on that, that would lower families' taxable income, and it would give them more money to pay for childcare. And people say, childcare, that's your choice to have children. But really, when you look at the economic impact of not helping families pay for childcare, it's enormous. So in New Hampshire alone, we have like $178 million a year missing in wages to parents that's lost because they didn't have affordable, reliable, guaranteed childcare. And so these are things we need to think about, especially in a state like New Hampshire that is always in need of more sources of revenue.
Right, right. So closely aligned with childcare, of course, is medical care.
Yeah.
And I was on your website looking at some of your platform, and on the website you mentioned Medicare for all, but even better.
Yes.
So what do you mean by even better, and how do you propose to transition to our current system, which is only Medicare for people over 65,
Yes.
to Medicare for all, even better?
Absolutely. Great question. I love this. I think that healthcare is a human right. I think that everybody should have access to great healthcare from the day they are born until the day they die. And unfortunately, for too many people, that's just not a reality right now. And so when I talk about Medicare for all, we actually have legislation that's already been proposed in Congress, and we have a will to do it. So the majority of Americans actually support a single-payer healthcare system. They also agree that most people, everyone, should have access to healthcare. And so the question is, why do we not have this? And so when I talk about Medicare for all, but better, I say I want to support Medicare for all, the legislation that's already been introduced, and I want to improve it. So when people talk about Medicare for all and make it better, we can include things like dental care, eye care, mental health care, things that aren't necessarily included in people's Medicare right now. And I know this because, my dad turned 65 and he was praising the Lord the day he didn't have to pay $1 bazillion for his health insurance anymore, because he and my mom own their own business. And we all know that health insurance is so expensive and those prices have just been going up. And he says, even with Medicare, right, I still am paying all this money for other services. What if this was something that we did for not just people over 65, but for everyone? Right? And it would give our government the ability to bargain for things like medical devices and healthcare costs and prescription drugs. And it would take away all of this money that we're spending on things like Medicaid, right? And give people the opportunity to be cared for their whole lives. And then people can do a lot better and wouldn't have some of the chronic problems that we're not finding until they're older, or that people put off dealing with until they get that healthcare.
Right. Good points. So you said you already, support this legislation that's been introduced. It hasn't been passed.
Yes.
So you'd have to work to get it passed.
Yep.
But it sounds like, you're not necessarily a political insider. You've kind of actually positioned yourself as coming from outside the political establishment. So how does that shape the way that you're going to campaign and the way that you will try to work across party lines in order to get legislation such as Medicare for all passed?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that question. So you're right. I am absolutely not an insider to the Democratic Party establishment in New Hampshire. And what I am an insider to is what's going on in my community. I'm an insider to what's happening to a lot of families right now, which is people who are struggling with the cost of affording to live in New Hampshire. And what I want to do is make that life more easily accessible for people here. So when I talk about being an insider, last year in Hampton, we had a reassessment, right? Every 5 years, the state mandates a property reassessment. And people's property taxes went way up. And in part, this is because we have a federal government that is downshifting costs onto our state and a state government that is downshifting costs onto local municipalities. And that's where the buck stops. And for weeks and weeks, people were coming into our select board meetings and they were sharing stories of how the fact that we don't have a federal government or a state government that's paying their fair share is hurting them. And hearing those stories really gave me an inside perspective to just how hard it is for people to make ends meet right now, and a real motivation to try to make life better for all of us.
Awesome. So on the one hand, it's great that you're not necessarily a Washington insider.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about some of the experience that you've had, additional experience and qualifications that will help you be a good representative. What other positions have you held? What other experience have you had that will help you be successful?
So I actually got my start as a high school civics teacher, and I lived and worked outside of the U.S. in the Republic of the Marshall Islands, which is a place between Hawaii and Australia, and it's also where the United States did its nuclear weapons testing after World War II. So the U.S. tested 67 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands, and a lot of the people there today are still dealing with the health consequences of that U.S. foreign policy. And they're also dealing with climate change, because one of the highest places in the Marshall Islands is only about 10 feet above sea level.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, most places you can hear and see like the ocean and the lagoon from anywhere you are. All of which is to say, like, that experience and recognizing that I hadn't been very familiar with that history growing up in the United States made me ask, like, what is the connection between this history and the current policy decisions that are making it hard for people to get the health care they need? And it's not just Marshallese people. Like, it's people in the United States right now where the Trump administration has stopped giving people or stopped reviewing healthcare claims from our own workers and veterans and people who are exposed to, uranium and part of the enrichment process here. And so all these questions about healthcare and what our policies can do to make life better for people inspired me to go to graduate school and study this. And while I was there, I ended up becoming a union organizer. So I didn't think that this was what I was going to do.
For what union? Or
the UAW, United
Okay.
Auto Workers. Yes, Local 5118, I helped start it. And I helped start it from, having these conversations about how do we get better protections for our workers? Do we need things like access to dependent health care coverage, salaries maybe that cover the cost of living in this current political moment? And so we organized with people from across the university, right? Scientists and mathematicians and English majors and history people, not all of whom saw eye to eye on any part of this, right? But together over the course of having conversations and building coalitions and recognizing our shared interests and what we could accomplish if we worked together, we were able to go from card checking. So I got every single member of my department to sign a card to unionize. Then we unionized, right? We had the NLRB give us an election. We held hearings, we bargained, we testified. We fought really hard for our rights. And eventually, after going on strike, we won a contract. And that kind of experience, building those coalitions, listening to people who don't necessarily agree with you, not giving up on the fight, right? Not just blasting people on social media because they aren't on your side, but really going back and committing to what you need to do. And this process to get there, I think, is an experience that will serve me very well in Congress.
Excellent. Well, that leads right into my next question, because you were talking about building coalitions. My question was, what areas of Congress do you still feel, or what issues do you still feel that bipartisan cooperation is possible, and how would you go about achieving that?
I think it really is possible. And what's so exciting to me is that there are places where we're already seeing bipartisan cooperation in Congress right now. And they aren't necessarily the most glamorous, but for people in New Hampshire, they're some of the most important issues. And housing, I think, is a great example of this. So right now in the Senate, there's a piece of legislation called the Road to Housing Act that does things like provide resources for communities. Like in Hampton, we're talking about how do we rezone for redevelopment? How do we take industrial properties and make them into housing, right? How do we support those transitions? And we have a federal government that's already taking people from both sides, right? And they're saying, we actually really recognize this is a problem and that the federal government can help solve this. And it's so exciting because they can do things like support the extension of municipal infrastructure. So in Hampton, we have people who live on the other side of 95 who don't have like town sewer, for example. And the reason for that is because it's really expensive. But if we had a federal government that saw the value in investing in our local communities, we would be able to buy and provide the housing for all the people who live here. And so that's a place where I see that we've made progress and I believe more can be done. And that would be something I'd be really excited to be a part of.
Excellent. Excellent. So a lot of what we as voters like is transparency, right? So we want to know what's going on. I've signed up for every, Facebook page for every member of Congress to see what's going on and stuff like that. So if you were elected, how do you plan to support increasing transparency of government accountability, not just you, but the government as a whole?
Absolutely. I think that, two things that I would do right off the bat are support prohibiting Congress people and their spouses, family members from trading stocks. I think it's ridiculous that you can essentially be an insider trader, right? You have inside information that the rest of us don't have, and you can benefit financially from that. Right. So that's a huge thing, and that would be a real priority of mine. And also making sure that we can close this revolving door between our politicians who serve in office and then become lobbyists and then go back into politics. This is ridiculous. You can't kind of fix the system like that. It's really unfair for the rest of us. And so making sure to cut down on corruption in our government, right? And moving some of this big money and the inside information out of the way so that we can have real transparent government that works for all of us.
Terrific. Now, you've already mentioned that housing and the high cost of housing is a big issue for people in New Hampshire. And another one is the cost of electricity. The cost of electricity here in New Hampshire is one of the highest in the United States, right? And on the one hand, we have people saying that New Hampshire is pipeline poor. We need to build more fossil fuel pipelines. On the other hand, we have people saying we need more renewables. So What specific legislative actions do you think are necessary to try to lower energy costs for us here in New Hampshire?
Yeah, we definitely need to do this, right? Like, I get it. I'm the mom who's like, all right, we're not turning on the heat yet. It's not October 15th. Like, put on a sweater and another pair of socks, or like, you could take a cold shower and sit in front of the fan. And we're getting to a point where, for a lot of people,
I'm glad you're not my mom.
Yeah, right. But we're at the point now where it's just no longer okay to do that, right? Like, it's too hot, too many days in a row. There's people with health conditions who just can't afford to do that. And it's really frustrating because no matter how much you conserve, you still look at your bill and you're like, wow, it's still going up, right? No matter what we do individually, it's not seeming to make a difference on our pocketbooks. And so one of the things that I would do as a policymaker in Congress is really be a partner for individual families and homeowners. So one of the things that our federal government could do is help work with people to make their homes more energy efficient. And one of the ways that we could do this is help incentivize things like the installation of mini splits, right? Winterizing and weatherizing people's homes so that they can actually have an impact or some control over the costs of heating or cooling their houses and their energy bills. But the other thing we can do, right, is again, look at how much, we're being charged in terms of fees just to connect to the grid. And I think that that's a place where our federal government can ask some more questions, right, and give more benefit to the people who are actually paying those prices.
Yeah, thanks. So speaking of things that are high, I know we're going to move now from high electricity costs to high asthma rates.
Yeah.
I personally developed asthma at the age of 28, shortly after moving here to New Hampshire. And New Hampshire has some of the highest asthma rates in the country, which I was shocked at because we think of New Hampshire as mountains and ocean and stuff like that. And, what policies would you advocate to help reduce, climate pollution and other things that tend to exacerbate asthma?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's definitely one that I feel strongly about because I too have an inhaler now that I use from time to time. And my kids, have respiratory challenges. And I think that one of the things that we can do as a government, a federal government, is make sure that, in Merrimack, right, we've seen the impact of corporate pollution. We've seen PFAS in the water, but we've also seen that we are able to hold people who are causing these problems for us accountable. And that's exciting because it means that, if there's a will, there's a way, and we can do this. And so a couple of the things that I would do to address these healthcare concerns are going back to Medicare for all, making sure that everyone has access to really good healthcare coverage, right? Take away those things that deter people from going to the doctor, high deductibles, co-pays, right? Get the government, get the federal government, get the private health insurance out of that room when you are with your doctor trying to figure out what's best for you, right? Getting rid of these prior authorizations that are so burdensome to so many people and ensuring that everyone has health care. Giving those screenings to kids, right? We do that for lead, we can do that for PFAS, making sure that our youngest people are taken care of and their healthcare concerns are identified so that we can mitigate them early on.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering, what do you expect would be the biggest surprise for voters once they start digging into your platform and your past work?
I think that's a great question, and I'm curious, and I hope people will be surprised by all of the fun things that I have to offer and the ways in which I've devoted my life to public service. But I think one of the things that will probably surprise people the most is that I have Republicans in my family. I come from a family where there are people who supported Trump. And I believe really strongly that when I'm in Congress, I will be representing every single person in this district. I believe we need leaders who can listen to people who disagree with them, who can have those hard conversations, even when you're hearing things you don't want to hear, and keep coming back. And so what I say is that you'll probably be surprised that, I'm really open to conversations with a lot of different people. I don't just listen to people who can give me money or who agree with me. I really want to hear what everyone thinks and what we believe together can make this, district a lot better for all of us.
Okay. Well, I have a couple last questions to kind of a fun kind of lightning round set of questions for folks to get to know you a little bit better. I don't know if you've ever seen the Colbert questionnaire, like what's the best sandwich? I'm not going to ask you that one. But here are some of the quick questions I am going to ask you. Ice cream, hard or soft?
Hard, cookie dough.
Okay. Favorite sport?
Oh, my kids' soccer games. So fun.
Water, ocean or lake?
Ocean, but this is why we love New Hampshire, right? We have both ocean and lakes here. It's awesome.
Okay. Fruit?
Apples.
Okay. Pets, dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Okay.
I have two.
All right. So in closing, you have provided some great information for voters about yourself, and I think Justin's going to be flashing up on the screen how to connect with you if you want to volunteer for your campaign or get in contact with you. So thanks a lot. Folks, that's our show for today. We'd like to hear your ideas for our show topics. You can always reach us at talkmerrimack@gmail.com. And you can follow us at Talk Merrimack on Facebook and in Blue Sky. I look forward to our next conversation. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Merrimack. Let's talk.
Thanks you. All right.
Thank you.